Quite a dramatic weekend in Argentina. It seemed MotoGP might not be able to get a race in after all the severe freight delays saw Friday's action cancelled, but a heroic effort by all the teams and personnel saw a condensed two-day weekend get underway, and the drama didn't stop there. Action throughout the classes, but I think everybody, no matter who you support, left with a smile on their face as Aprilia and Aleix Espargaro took their first ever Grand Prix win in the Premier class. The recording date is Monday, the 4th of April. My name is Harry Benjamin. Alongside me, Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren and former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Huewen. And Keith, well, we have to start, don't we, with Aprilia. An emotional win for them and Aleix in his 200th start.
I know, and what a weekend it was as well. You get the feeling that Marc Marquez is waving a wand somewhere, just trying to distribute the points over as wider area as he can, and maybe even trying to make sure that the planes don't get there. Because the drama of this week, it just could not be any higher. I defy anybody, whether you're a motorcycle racing fan or not to have been excited by this week. It was one of them weekends that it's unique. And yeah, let's start with the plane, shall we first? Sorry to back it up just a bit further because that was a nightmare. Nothing on the Friday. The freight hadn't landed. Can you imagine the panic that was going on all those thousands of miles away from anywhere? I mean, it's probably one of the most inhospitable, far away destinations you could ever get to. You're not going to find anything you need anywhere near Termas de Rio Hondo, that's for certain. And when the planes, everybody, I can't believe it, it turned into everyone watching the plane tracker maps. Everyone was just sat on Friday watching where these planes were zigzagging. And of course, that big one broke down and meant half the freight couldn't get across there. And they can only land at Tucumán. They can only land one freighter at a time. It's a tiny little airport. So you've got a tiny little runway as well. So Dorna was sailing pretty close to the wind. They've been close to the wind before, but this one nearly caught them out. Let's hope it all makes it to Kota next week. Now moving on to your original question. Yes, fantastic, or statement I should say. Unbelievable. Aprilia finally, we know the bike's been good this year, but to put it together, did the fact that it was properly a level playing field, the fact that nobody managed to catch up on data after that Friday, the missing Friday, did that help them? Some might say so, but I think it was just an outstanding performance from the start. Having said that, did you get the feeling that he was going to throw it away on the last couple of laps? Because it looked the most nervous, the most tight I've ever seen a professional. Well, I'm trying to think. Is it 284th Grand Prix that Aleix Espargaro has ridden and never won a Grand Prix in any of the classes from 125 all the way through? He's never won a Grand Prix. It was his 200th MotoGP, and he won his 200th MotoGP, the first time he's ever won. Riding tight. I think he must have been damn near solid, his muscles, when he was going through those last couple of laps. He'd got it in the bag. It was in the bag, but you never got the feeling it was because it was frightening to watch. I was absolutely, my nails were bent backwards on my hands watching the final few laps because the man behind him, he's tough, and he was putting him under pressure all the way. An incredible event, an incredible achievement, and fair dues to all concerned. We ended up with a fantastic Grand Prix.
As you say, Keith, the guy behind him, I mean, Aleix's words, he said, Jorge's a killer when it comes to a race situation. It doesn't matter about the pace. If you put him in a race and he can see the chance of a win, he's going to go for it. And, we saw Aleix try, was it 3 times to overtake him? 2 times he ran wide. Jorge Martin was extremely good on the brakes. And then finally, that last pass, he made it work. And Martin said, he didn't quite have the pace of Aleix, but he was just digging in there and fighting, wasn't he? And pushing, looking for the mistake that you were mentioning, Keith, looked like it might have come. That seemed to be his tactics in those last laps because he ran out of tyre and everything else. He's pushing as hard as he can, and that was all he could do by the end. He just couldn't hold Aleix off any longer. Aleix had looked strong all weekend, hadn't he? He just, from free practice, warm-up, he looked good again. And also Maverick Vinales, the bike just seemed to really click with this track, didn't it? And yep, now we have all 6 bikes have won races in MotoGP. Aprilia still keep concessions for now. It's not enough to quite move them out of concessions, but it looks like this will be their last year of concessions if they carry on like this. So, a great result. I mean, Aleix, as you say, the only rider on the Premier Class grid without a win in any class. And it's taken all of this time. He's 32 years old now. And he's saying now he hopes he can make up for all the sort of wins that he didn't get earlier in his career in these last sort of year or two.
Pol Espargaro, brother, stepped out of it, of course, on the Repsol Honda, and that was a disaster for them and for him. I mean, if you remember, I talked about Aleix Espargaro nearly choking at Rio Hondo, but what about Pol Espargaro not last year, it was the year before in Austria, where he had the thing in the bag and they held out the pit board saying plus zero, I think, and he went all defensive and basically ruined his race lead and was beaten by 2 riders to the line. So he's yet to win a MotoGP race, Pol Espargaro. So double, damnation for him. In a right old state he looked as well. I don't know whether it was tears of joy or the fact that it was combined with those memories of losing out in Austria when he should have won it back then. So the Espargaro boys, what a weekend of emotions.
Hell of a Sunday night dinner as well, I think that'll be. But
it would have been meat. It would have only been meat.
Steak,
no
of
greenery
course, absolutely. But it would have been cause for celebration. Obviously, everyone up and down the paddock so elated for Aleix and Aprilia. And Keith, we've spoken, a lot about Maverick Vinales in the last year, especially, leaving Yamaha and the tough times he's gone through. He wasn't quite up there with Aleix, but he seemed very positive after the race, and this was good from Vinales. This is positive signs.
100%, Harry. I'm glad you picked that one up, actually, because he got beaten up a bit on those early laps, and we all expected him to go backwards, because Vinales, just for some reason or another, doesn't have that elbow out fight that you need nowadays. And I've not worked out, I don't think anybody can work out why that is, because he's an exceptional rider. There's no doubt about it, given the space to be able to, elaborate on that. But he was in a fight to make manoeuvres. He was having to stick his front wheel where he, of late, wouldn't really have wanted to. So I think a good ride from Maverick Vinales, and hopefully that confidence of that fight will move into the next few rounds. And, obviously Aprilia are flying now. I mean, it's Romano Albesiano, the team manager. Well, actually, what is he? Team Tech, isn't he now? I don't know. They moved him down one from Rivola. But anyway, Albesiano, he's got one of them sort of strange faces anyway, to be frank with you. But he looked like, I didn't know whether it was a grimace or a smile. He didn't look like he knew whether to burst out crying or laughing. It was the oddest set of facial features I think I've seen from any experienced team person in my life. They were going through massive pain, and it's a tiny factory, Noali. It's not like the Aprilia factory is not like some of the others. It's probably the smallest factory with the smallest budget, really, even though the parent company seems to have plenty of money. But it's a massive achievement. And they've had some massive failures in the Premier class in the past. You remember the Cube, for God's sake. Great name for a motorbike, but not quite where it needed to be.
Well, I suppose, Pete, is this a sign that, Aprilia, can they become regular challengers now?
I mean, it's been so unpredictable, isn't it, this year so far, that we've had 9 different riders on the podium, haven't we? No one has actually managed a double podium yet. So we're still waiting to see, aren't we, who is actually going to emerge here. But, I mean, if they can repeat this kind of form, this was consistent pace, as we're saying, throughout the weekend from certainly Aleix, and Maverick was also, as you say, took a big step. He seemed to be very happy with this different setting he found in warm-up at Mandalika. We didn't see it in the race, of course, as much because it was wet, but he said that is now his base setting. He was really confident, as Keith says, after the race, because he believes he's got something to build on now. He said, look, now I'm consistent. I've got race pace. He thinks he found something like 20 seconds compared to his previous sort of pace that he was delivering. Certainly, if you look at Qatar, he was over 25 seconds from the win. He was only 6 seconds on Sunday. So he's feeling confident there. And yeah, we've got to see now. He goes on to Kota, a track that Vinales likes, but Aprilia have done, Aleix anyway, has really struggled at, hasn't he, in the past? So it's going to be really interesting to see what they can do this weekend.
Well, new surface and everything at Kota, that should make some difference as well. I mean, it's going to be a bit different for everybody, but harping on about what this race win probably means to Aprilia and to the riders. Obviously, it lifts everybody mentally, but also it frees off budget usually. Once you've got a situation where you've got a team that's doing something, suddenly budget starts to move around a little bit. Suddenly that extra buddy, whatever you were asking for, and that extra bit of development and those extra few personnel that you need to get things done back at the factory, that sort of stuff starts to loosen up a little bit. So it makes life a lot easier from a factory team's point of view. You mentioned concessions, Pete, earlier on, and quite rightly. I actually had a quick squint at the rules this morning just to make sure that, because I thought you might be going there. Really, they don't lose concessions until next year, effectively. They've got to get to 6 points. They've got 3 points for this race win. When they get to 6 points, they lose concessions next year. Testing, they lose testing. Test riders, they lose test riders. They only have to have 7 engines, not the 9 they're allowed this year. They can't make the changes next year that they would make this year. We saw Suzuki that went through those same pains when they got to that point. It's very difficult, to suddenly start the season with what you've got. Whereas Aprilia right now, they are in the driving seat. This championship, they lead the world championship. That's worth pointing out. We haven't done that yet. Like Aleix Espargaro leads the world title, and they've got concessions so they can make changes. So if they've got the wherewithal back at the factory to bring new bits, to change stuff around still for the better, if there are things that they can still improve that they've got in the pipeline, they're allowed to use them. So, they're in the hot seat at the moment regarding all of this. Aleix Espargaro has got huge experience. The only thing he never had was a checkered flag in any class. He's got that now. Believe me, that is going to be a monkey off his back like you cannot believe. He's going to be a believer all of a sudden in himself. Not that he hasn't been, but he's kind of an emotional sort of a fellow, isn't he? He's not like a gunslinger kind of MotoGP man. He's a family married man, with emotions that he wears his heart on his sleeve. It's usually all out there for everybody to see and hear. So this is going to make an absolute major difference. And like I say, compatriot back at base, Marc Marquez, who might make it for COTA, might not make it for COTA. All of this, again, is playing into his hands, as every single weekend we have a change of winner. We had the points spread out in the most thinnest way by the time that Marquez comes back. And if he is anything like on any kind of form, which I don't believe he will be, but if he is, the championship is still there to be won over this long season, the longest ever.
Well, if we stick...
Also
sorry, Pete, go on.
Just for a second, Harry, but he also mentioned how, there were a lot of, we also spoke about this, there were a lot of Moto2 riders that didn't want this bike, weren't there? They were offered the chance to join Aprilia a year or two ago, and they said they'd rather have a better bike. Aleix is very proud of the fact that he's joined, this is his 6th year at the team. He's put in that work to really help bring the team forward and put them into this position. And he said it actually, that was a big motivation for him to see guys that are not even in MotoGP yet turning down his bike. He took that personally. There's sort of a hunger to prove them wrong. And, now they're there. They're winners, as Keith was saying. Now they've done it now. They've got that confidence. Vinales was saying exactly what Keith is saying. This will lift the whole team. Vinales, of course, has won 9 races with Yamaha. He knows the effect that winning can have just on the group of people in the team. They're going to be, they're going to be all a little bit taller, aren't they, when they arrive in COTA? They're all going to be a little bit more, chest out and everything else. They can do it now. It's one thing, as Keith says, it's one thing to believe you can do it. It's another thing to actually do it. They have done it. A lot of people would have doubted it. It's been a long time coming, let's be honest. But they're there now, and it's going to be really interesting to see what this big boost of confidence does. And let's hope that the factory gets behind it more, because they have a great chance this year. Let's make the most of these concessions, because they might not have them next year.
There's a bigger queue at Aprilia at the moment than there is at Yamaha, that's for sure. I mean, Quartararo couldn't do a thing right at the weekend, could he, really, at the end of that day? I mean, it was a poor old weekend again for Yamaha.
What's going on? What's wrong with them at the moment?
They're 10 mile an hour down, and when you've got a certain type of racetrack, it's the same old thing. When you're on a motorbike with talent as there isn't anybody now in that entire field that hasn't won a Grand Prix, now that Aleix has managed to do it. I think you said that a minute ago, Pete. Sorry for pinching your words again. You know what us riders are like. We like to plagiarise and claim it as our own. There isn't a rider now that hasn't won a Grand Prix in MotoGP. They've all won a Grand Prix. So the level of rider is hugely brilliant. So when you're giving away in a straight line, and it comes down to the same old thing, you get to the end of the straight, a rider's alongside you up the inside because he's managed to not necessarily even pull out the slipstream when you're 6, 7, 8 mile an hour down, pulls alongside you, puts himself right where he needs to be in the braking area, and you're on the outside and pushed out in the dirty stuff. So you can never, ever, and that can happen lap after lap after lap. Quartararo got castigated a little bit by Jack Miller last time out for pushing and shoving. It's all he can do. All you can do is push and shove straight back at somebody if you're on a slower bike. I mean, 8 mile an hour don't sound like much, but I think I said it last time out. If someone runs past you fast, that's about 8 mile an hour, isn't it?
Hmm.
So if somebody runs past you while you're walking and they just run straight past you, you ain't going to catch them. And that's, on a 200 mile an hour plus motorcycle, it makes a massive difference. It positions your competition in a place that you can't counter straight away quite often. Yamaha's a brilliant motorbike, turns, stops, does all the bits and pieces that it should do. But when you've got a bike that's faster than you and is also on a par with the I think that's the other thing with the Aprilia. It looks good on a racetrack, doesn't it? I mean, it was the Ducatis that were all over the place. They were. It's quite funny. You watch the old cars nowadays, the Formula One, and they go on about porpoising. This is a new word to me in motorsport. Porpoising. What the bloody hell is that? We got a dolphin on the track, but now we've got the same thing with Ducati. It was proper porpoising in places. And Bagnaia, I've never seen a man so incandescent with rage over the way his bike was going. It's incredible.
There's a lot of unhappy people. There's a lot of unhappy people in up and down this paddock at the moment. But let's just stick with Yamaha for a second. It seems we went on to them. And Pete, Fabio was the best Yamaha, 8th, 10.2 seconds off in the end. The reigning champion. I know we're only 3 races in, but he's got to be seething, right? He's going to be, you've spoken about this a lot as well. Contracts, this is the time when people are looking at new contracts. Is he going to be looking around? Surely he will.
Well, he said also after Sunday, he said, he's not going to be in any rush. He's going to take his time over this. And you've got to think every time there's a setback like this. And his big problem, as Keith said, was top speed. And it was sort of compounded by just a really big lack. He called ridiculous was the word he used, lack of rear grip. And he wasn't the only Yamaha. Morbidelli said the same thing. It seems like something with the Yamaha, it suffers more after the Moto2 race. You've got the Dunlop rubber. The track temperature was different because Quartararo had been very fast in the warm-up. Everything was looking good, but then just zero grip in those early laps. They get shuffled back, and as the track cleaned up, the rubber goes down, they start to find pace in the second half of the race. It's a pattern we've seen with Maverick Vinales a lot during his Yamaha career, wasn't it? Keith was mentioning how he'd get muscled back at the start of the race. It was almost what we saw from Quartararo. He dropped from 6th to 13th in about 2 laps. Morbidelli went to 20th in the same space of in that same space of time. Morbidelli then had a puncture. We should say that was why he actually retired. For people that might be wondering why he pitted, it wasn't a tire failure or anything like that. He actually had a puncture, so pretty rare that we see that happen. But yeah, so Quartararo, the big problem was this lack of rear grip, and then he had no top speed again. So yeah, it's similar problems. He was obviously really frustrated because Kota, another track with a really, really long straight. You've got to imagine he's going to have the same sort of difficulties again. His only hope, or his big hope, is he's got to qualify well and try and get away at the front. And so even though he was starting on the second row in 6th, obviously that sort of tangle with Jack Miller, that wasn't enough. Even a second row start wasn't enough for him to sort of avoid these sort of early lap problems that they have getting up to speed and getting the grip. So qualifying is going to be massive for him again this weekend. The other Yamahas, Darren Binder, he did another solid job, didn't he? He had some impressive performances again. His teammate Dovi, bizarre problem. He put his ride height device on, the front ride height device, and there's some sort of switch to unlock it, and he forgot to flick the switch, so the bike stayed locked down. And then when they came back to the pits, apparently the trouble is they realised what had happened, but you can't sort of release it without the bike in motion, with all the forces of the braking. So they were trying to sort of release it and everything else. So just a real mix up. Dovi apologized, obviously, but it's just, we've had 3 wins, haven't we? And they've all been by European manufacturers. We're yet to see a Japanese manufacturer win a race this year. And it's just, the things that are happening in these opening races have been unbelievable, really, haven't they? So, yeah, so not a great race for Yamaha, as you say. And, I'm not sure Kota's going to be much better for them, to be honest.
The start of a season is always weird, though, isn't it? Because the MotoGP, we get all the weird ones out of the way, don't we? Qatar in the dark, Termas, million miles away from anywhere, Mandalika, brand spanking new, and the track breaking up, Kota, track breaking up before, and a sort of an odd track really to be going to. Once we get these ones out of the way, the Yamaha is still a very, very good motorbike. That rear grip problem is a big problem because, if they're 5, 6, 7 mile an hour down on horsepower, and they can't lay it onto the road to get out of a corner, there'll be another 3 or 4 mile an hour down by the end of the straight. That's just how it works. And I think Yamaha will be good again at racetracks that it is good at, but they will have given an advantage away. But this season is going to be one of them ones where I don't think you can bet on anybody at the moment. I mean, you've got to look at the so-called experts. Hang on a minute, Aprilia win from Jorge Martin.
I'm just checking our predictions. I don't think any of us had that one.
I mean, I think I got Alex Rins in there. Who did well out of our predictions?
Yeah, you're actually right. You had Rins in second, but you do get the point because you had him on the podium at least. So, but apart from that, Pete, Quartararo, you had pole, and then Bagnaia, and I was well off. I had Mir close, nearly, but
yeah, that was a good shout. It was a good shout. Yeah.
But I had Miller and Quartararo, and but it's you can't predict, isn't it? Simple as you just cannot look at the stats.
And that's the wonderful thing about MotoGP. I mean, anybody that's fresh to this sport will think, bloody hell, this is good. You can. I think it's another reason why it goes down so well. I mean, I'm going to ramble across, all over the place here, but why it goes down so well in Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asians from Japan work your way, from the Far East across to Southeast Asia. They all have like fan clubs for individual riders, and nowadays any one of those individual riders can win races. So from a fan's perspective, it couldn't be much better than it is at the moment. You can't bet on it. You can have a favourite, but you can't be sure that it wasn't like the old days where you would have one rider and one team that might dominate throughout the year. I made a joke about Marquez waving his magic wand, but he must be sitting back at home feeling pretty sick and miserable about his injury. But the fact is that this championship, hope is still there. There is still the possibility. This long season is nowhere near over in the first 3 rounds. We've got a long, long, long way to go yet. And the likes of Marquez can still make a comeback. Can't wait.
It's a long, long way to go, isn't it? But I want to move on, if I may, to I just want to sort of see off our top 3 and talk about Ducati as well, because you mentioned it earlier, Pete. I think they say it on the commentary as well. Jorge Martin is a pit bull.